let's start this final session for today and the final session for the whole Mahamudra retreat. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. We'll start with a meditation relating to cultivating this view of genuine happiness we saw as one of the common preliminaries. Then we'll review some of the earlier points in the earlier session. And then we'll continue back into the text, and it talks a little bit about the stages that we go through in this this Mahamudra practice in terms of these 5 paths, the classic presentation, and also mentions the 4 yogas, which is a presentation within the oral Mahamudra tradition. And then the text finishes with a dedication. And then after going through all these text and all these various practices, where to start? Where do we start with this Mahamudra? So we'll have a look at that. And we'll do another meditation, developing a vision for this life, and then how to integrate some of these practices into daily life, and then question answer at the end. But let's start with this meditation relating to cultivating this view of genuine happiness. So find a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. Establishing a good, comfortable posture. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Releasing all activities of the mind and simply allowing it to come to rest. To come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Relaxed, still, and clear. We all want to be happy, and we all want to be free of suffering. And it often seems to us as if the source of our happiness and the source of our suffering is out there in the world. And as a result, one of the main methods we use to try to find happiness and overcome suffering is that we try to manipulate the things around us. We try to attract people, places, and things that seem to be the source of our happiness. And we try to push away or avoid people, places, and things that seem to be the source of our suffering. However, is this an effective strategy? Using this strategy, are we getting any closer to overcoming suffering and any closer to achieving genuine happiness? No matter how hard we try to control and manipulate things around us, we still seem to encounter suffering. And we're still chasing after that elusive happiness. All that we're really achieving by using this method is that we are simply trapping ourselves in the hope-fear cycle. Hoping for pleasant experiences and fearing or worrying about unpleasant experiences. And if we don't get the things we want, we often become very frustrated. And even if we do get the things we want, they never really fully satisfy us, and we simply end up craving for more. And we often end up with a lot of dissatisfaction and disappointment when things don't live up to our expectations. So what's the solution? According to Buddhism, we're simply looking in the wrong place. What would happen if we instead turned our attention to our own mind? What would happen if we began to cultivate more mindfulness, to cultivate a more calm, clear, and focused mind? And what would happen if we could begin to see things more clearly and accurately, without projecting or distorting what we apprehend? And instead of reacting to things out of old habits, we could begin to respond in ways more conducive to our own and others' happiness. And what would happen if we could begin to reduce our mental afflictions, such as craving and attachment, anger and jealousy, fear and anxiety, and so on? And we began to cultivate loving kindness and compassion for ourselves and others. And what would happen if we could begin to see the difficult situations in our life not as problems or obstacles, but rather as opportunities for growth and development? So let's set a positive motivation, a motivation wishing to discover practical methods to overcome our mental afflictions and suffering, and to find that genuine happiness and well-being. And that we can extend our motivation out to also include others, also wishing to help those around us to overcome their mental afflictions and suffering and find genuine happiness and well-being. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So just a short review of some of the points from the last session. We're looking at the illusory-like emptiness practice, what to do in post-meditation. And here the text said, in brief, do not grasp onto any of those things which appear to you, even your own mind. Constantly sustain your practice by alternating the space-like meditative equipoise of ascertaining the way in which they actually exist with the post-meditation of the undeniable dawning of dependently related agents and actions. And so here, emptiness practice, two parts. There is the meditation, the space-like emptiness meditation. And then in post-meditation, to see things as like an illusion, to realize that things are dependent arisings, that they're not existing there independently, that they're like an illusion, that they are merely labeled, merely imputed. And then the measure of our understanding of emptiness being complete is when emptiness does not block appearances and appearances do not block emptiness. To really appreciate and understand that emptiness or dependent arisings and emptiness and dependent arisings are like two sides of a coin, that they are equivalent. Because things are empty, therefore they can appear and function. Because things appear and function, they must be empty. That is the middle way path between the two extremes of existence and non-existence. And when we talked about these two extremes in this text, we really just talked about in terms of philosophical view. We talked about the extreme of existence, which is grasping to independent existence, and the extreme of non-existence, or in other words, nihilism. And we saw there that the antidote to the extreme of existence, how we overcome that, is through emptiness, coming to realize that nothing exists independently. But then often when we do that, we flip to the other extreme, thinking that emptiness means nothing really exists, and we fall into the extreme of nihilism or non-existence. How we overcome that is reflect on dependent arising, that things exist, they're dependent arisings, existing depending on causes, conditions, parts, and labeling. But also in terms of two extremes, we can talk about two extremes in terms of meditation. And we saw that within the shamatha practice. The two imbalances, the two extremes, is either dullness and distraction, or in the text it's called laxity and excitation. How do we overcome those? How do we overcome laxity or dullness? Is tighten the focus, sharpen the focus. How do we overcome excitation, distraction? Loosen the focus. We saw there in the text the analogy of a string of a lute or guitar string. We need to have the right pitch. Too tight, we get agitated. Too loose, we fall into dullness. So this is how we overcome the two extremes in meditation, in shamatha practice. But also we can talk about the two extremes in terms of conduct. And this is very much exemplified by the life of Prince Siddhartha before he became Buddha. First, he grew up in a palace, and he was caught in the extreme of indulgence, having all the worldly pleasures. But then he saw that that wasn't the solution, because he went out and saw the harsh reality by going outside the palace and saw there's aging, sickness, and death, and so forth. But then he tried to overcome that, and he flipped to the other extreme of asceticism, of denial, thinking that it's that would be the way to overcome suffering. But he just flipped to the other extreme, and then he overcame that asceticism by understanding that the real cause of suffering is not the body, but it's our mental afflictions, particularly distorted view of reality, this ignorance. And so therefore he overcome those two extremes by the first two noble truths. Overcome indulgence by understanding that what is the human condition? Pleasure is not happiness. And then overcome asceticism by understanding that the real underlying cause of suffering is the mental afflictions, particularly the ignorance, fundamental ignorance. But then we can also talk about the two extremes in terms of abiding. Now we are abiding in samsara. We don't want to be there. And so we want to be liberated from samsara. And how do we be how are we to be liberated by some samsara? Is through eliminating ignorance, through the wisdom of emptiness. Then we can be liberated and achieve nirvana. But from the Mahayana perspective, nirvana is also an extreme, because in this solitary state of nirvana, we're in a solitary state of peace, but where we have no connection with anything else in the universe, meaning we can't help anyone in that state. So that's the other extreme from a Mahayana perspective. How do we overcome the extreme of solitary nirvana? Is through compassion, particularly the compassion of bodhicitta. And that will then lead us onto enlightenment for the benefit of others. So these are the two extremes in terms of view, meditation, conduct, and abiding. And we also saw there in the text that we are stuck, or not in the text, sorry, well, the text said, due to grasping to I and mine, all sentient beings cycle in samsara. And then we have this chart to highlight why that is the case. These are the steps that we go through, why we're stuck in samsara due to this grasping to I and mine. So I won't go through that again, apart from the fact of highlighting here, again, if we want to overcome suffering, we want to be liberated from suffering, then we have to go back to the underlying cause, which is ignorance and the seed of ignorance, the habit of ignorance. And so we need to overcome that ignorance to overcome the mental afflictions and the suffering. And so that is the afflictive obscurations. This is grasping to I and mine. That's what we need to overcome suffering, achieve liberation, achieve nirvana. So that's what's obscuring nirvana, is this self-grasping. But then, even if we achieve nirvana, we still have these subtle stains in our mind. So even someone who's achieved nirvana, what's called an arhat, they look around, and to them also, everything appears to them to exist independent, completely independent of them. They also still have the mistaken dualistic appearance. But because now they have fully realized emptiness, they directly realize these appearances are deceptive. So they never buy into those appearances. They never cause a problem. But they still have the mistaken dualistic appearance. How do we get rid of that? We have to get rid of the underlying cause, which are these stains of ignorance in our mind. And so this is what we need to get rid of to then move on from nirvana to enlightenment. These are the cognitive obscurations, these stains of ignorance, plus the mistaken dualistic appearance that they produce. So someone who has achieved enlightenment, again, we saw the title of the text, a jinnah, a victor, is someone who's eliminated both of these obscurations. So someone who's achieved enlightenment doesn't receive or have this mistaken dualistic appearance that we have. What that would look like is unimaginable for us, because we have never seen, everything has always appeared to us in this mistaken dualistic way. So it's a bit hard to imagine how the world would appear to them. I guess the only way to find out is become enlightened, and then we'll see for ourselves. And so now what I'd like to do is go back to the text and look at how then we move along the path to enlightenment. Because now the text says, through sustaining Mahamudra, by riding on the horse of shamatha in that way. So remember, if we want to move along the path with this wisdom of emptiness, we need the horse of shamatha. We need to be riding that horse of shamatha. Otherwise, as we saw earlier, if we don't have shamatha and we do vipassana practice of emptiness, then at best we can have some taste or experience of emptiness. And that may be quite profound, and it may still affect us a little bit outside of meditation and have a little bit of benefit for a short time, reducing mental afflictions a little bit, but it'll wear off. So if we want to really start to progress along the path, we need to ride the horse of shamatha to come to a direct insight into emptiness. So then it goes on to says, when a concentration imbued with the bliss of physical and mental pliancy is attained by the force of analysis focused on emptiness, then the heat level of the path of preparation is attained. So I'll unpack that in a little bit. But first, just to understand here, the path to enlightenment, the classic presentation within sutra level is the 5-path model. These 5 stages called the path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, and path of no more learning. Just to jump ahead one, we have that handout. So if you have that handout handy, you might like to look at that now, just to follow what I'm going to explain. But I'll go back to the slide before, and then we'll jump back to this once I've explained a few basic details first. So these 5 paths are 5 stages on the way to enlightenment: path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. So this is the Mahayana path to enlightenment. And we saw earlier in the preliminaries, what is the door of entry into the Mahayana path was bodhicitta. So once we've cultivated bodhicitta, we enter the path. But it's what's called uncontrived bodhicitta, meaning that when we have this aspiration for aspiring for enlightenment for the benefit of others, if that naturally and continuously arises in our mind throughout the day, we have uncontrived bodhicitta, we've entered the Mahayana path, and we're known as a bodhisattva. So bodhisattva is someone who's entered the Mahayana path. And the first stage here, path of accumulation, this word accumulation is again accumulating those two wings, the wisdom and the merit. Merit is virtuous activities. So as part of the wisdom wing, we are meditating on emptiness. So when we've moved into path of accumulation, we've already achieved shamatha, but we still don't have this union of shamatha and vipassana on emptiness that we saw earlier, way earlier in the shamatha text, and we mentioned a few times. So on the basis of shamatha, we have the horse of shamatha, and we're experiencing emptiness, but it's a conceptual experience of emptiness, meaning that when we experience emptiness, there's still a sense of me, the meditator, experiencing this object. And then we continue to do that meditation. And then as we're doing it, then through the force of that analysis on emptiness, we generate this bliss of physical and mental pliancy, a little bit like way back when we achieved shamatha, but this is a little bit different here. But when we do that, then shamatha and vipassana now are unified, and now we've entered the path of preparation. And the word preparation means we're preparing now for our first direct realization of emptiness. So still on the path of preparation, when we realize emptiness, it's still a dualistic experience, meaning that in the realization of emptiness, there's still a sense of me, the meditator, realizing this emptiness. But as we continue to meditate on emptiness again and again and again on the path of preparation, that apparent duality between me, the meditator, and emptiness, the object that I'm realizing, starts to collapse. And eventually it completely collapses. And then we have our first direct, non-dualistic realization of emptiness. Then we move into path of seeing emptiness directly. Once we've had our first direct realization of emptiness, we become known as what's called an Arya Bodhisattva. Remember earlier in the text, we saw an Arya was someone who's had a direct realization of emptiness. Here on the Mahayana path, we're a Bodhisattva. When we realize emptiness, we become an Arya Bodhisattva. But when we directly realize emptiness here, that's powerful enough to start to eliminate mental afflictions, ignorance and mental afflictions. But one realization of emptiness is not enough to eliminate it all. Prior to the path of seeing, the conceptual realization on accumulation preparation was strong enough to sort of subdue the mental afflictions, meaning that earlier, that meditation on emptiness, outside of the meditation in daily life, we would notice that on the path of accumulation, particularly path of preparation, even more so, that our mental afflictions, it's hard for them to arise. And if they arise, they're very weak and they last a very short time. But we haven't started to eliminate any mental afflictions yet. We start to do that on the path of seeing through direct realization of emptiness. But we have to continue to directly realize emptiness again and again and again and again to slowly wipe out more layers of ignorance and mental afflictions. And we do that on the next stage, what's called the path of meditation. The path of meditation is divided up into 9 sections, and those 9 plus, together with the path of seeing, these are called the 10 grounds or 10 bhumis in Sanskrit. And what we're doing over each of those grounds or bhumis, we're wiping out more and more subtle layers of ignorance and mental afflictions. When we reach what's called the 7th ground, we've eliminated all mental afflictions, all ignorance, and therefore all suffering. We've achieved nirvana. So we've eliminated the afflictive obscurations. But still those subtle stains in our mind, that's causing this mistaken dualistic appearance, still there, difficult to get rid of. So what we're doing then over the last 3 stages, ground 8, 9, and 10 on the path of meditation, is we are eliminating, we're starting to eliminate those subtle stains, again, through realizing emptiness again and again and again and again. Then at the end of the 10th ground, right at the end of path of meditation, we sit down for the last time to meditate on emptiness. And up until this point, whenever we're in meditation on emptiness and directly realizing emptiness, the only thing appearing is emptiness. And then when we're outside of meditation, we see the phenomenal world. So we're alternating between seeing the phenomenal world and realizing emptiness, right up until the end of the 10th ground. So we sit down again the last time, we directly realize emptiness, and then that last subtle stain in our mind is gone, and then the phenomenal world appears to us, and we're still realizing emptiness directly. And then we move into the 5th stage, path of no more learning. We've achieved enlightenment, and now we become an Arya Buddha. A bodhisattva, when they achieve enlightenment, become Buddha. So that is very briefly the stages we go through. So maybe just to add a couple of things using the actual diagram, the chart. So again, we see right at the beginning there, underneath the 5 paths, number 2, this uncontrived renunciation and bodhicitta. But even before that, we see the 1, which says inferential realization of emptiness, sharp faculty trainees, meaning that those who are very sharp faculty, they will, even before they enter the path, they'll investigate this emptiness and really come to a conceptual realization of emptiness. And then that, for them, that confirms, yes, this, I can really achieve enlightenment. And then they develop bodhicitta and move on through the stages. And we see that the path of accumulation, path of preparation, divided up into sub-stages, but we don't really need to discuss that here. And again, we see the path of seeing plus the 9 parts of path of meditation divided up into these 10 grounds, 10 bhumis. And along the first 7 grounds, we're eliminating this ignorance through directly realizing emptiness again and again and again. End of the 7th ground, we see down the bottom under there, number 9 means we've achieved nirvana, we've become an arhat. But here on the Mahayana path, that wasn't our that wasn't our final goal. So then we continue to meditate on emptiness. And over the last 3 grounds there, we're abandoning these cognitive obscurations, these subtle stains in our mind that cause this mistaken dualistic appearance. We do that at the end, finally at the end of the 10th ground. Then we go into path of no more learning, and we achieve enlightenment, become Buddha. A lot more to be said about these 5 paths, but I think that's enough now. So this is the classic model that we'll see at the sutra level of practice in Mahayana. Whereas in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions within the Kagyu Nyingma school, they often don't really use so much this 5-path model. What you'll often find is the 4 yoga model. And so that's what the text now says. Panchen Lama says, some earlier Kagyu masters presented the path of Mahamudra in terms of 4 yogas. And so the path to enlightenment in Mahamudra in the Kagyu tradition is often described through going through these 4 yogas, these 4 stages. And each one of those 4 is divided into small, middling, and great. So the extensive presentation is you go through 12 stages. So let's briefly look at them. The first one says, the yoga of single pointedness due to observing the mind single pointedly. So this is seems like very much like shamatha, and there's definitely shamathas included, but also it's not just shamatha, this yoga of single pointedness, because there's also vipassana. There's an insight into emptiness, but it's conceptual. Whereas the next yoga, the yoga of freedom from elaboration, or elaboration means grasping, freedom from grasping, due to realizing the mind is free from elaboration. So now we're really talking about realizing the mind directly as empty of inherent existence, that releasing realizing emptiness directly with respect to the mind. So this seems like very similar to the path of seeing. And then we have the yoga of one taste, due to realizing the mind and appearances as one taste. So we saw a little bit earlier in the Tantra Mahamudra that in the Geluk tradition, when we talk about one taste or this co-emergent, then we talk about mind, emptiness and the mind being one taste. Whereas here in Kagyu, often it's the mind and appearances as one taste, being non-dual. Now this, okay, I'll continue, I'll come back to it. And then the yoga of non-meditation, due to it being a meditation, due to it not being a meditation with signs. So signs means conceptual activity. So non-meditation is the practice we saw earlier in that Essence Mahamudra, where we are first, through those pointing out instructions, we cut through to the very subtle mind. And then once we get there, then we have this non-meditation where we just rest in that. And the very subtle mind is free of all conceptuality. So there's no sign of conceptuality. That's what it means, not being a meditation with signs. So actually, the yoga of one taste and the yoga of non-meditation are a lot to do about cutting through to the very subtle mind. Whereas here, then, they try to make some parallels between, what's the parallel then between the 5 paths model and this 4 yoga model? And so here one master, Jay Gotsampa, correlates the two. He says that the first yoga, the single-pointedness, correlates with what's called intentional conduct, which is the first 2, path of accumulation, path of preparation. So he's saying that that's more or less the same. And there is some parallels there. And then the yoga of freedom from elaboration, it has some parallels with path of seeing, direct insight into nature of mind. And then the yoga of one taste, he says, is roughly equivalent with 2nd to the 7th ground, when we're eliminating those afflictive obscurations. And then the yoga of non-meditation is the pure grounds, which is the 8th, 9th, and 10th ground, and so forth. But this is a rough correlation because the 5 path model is really at the sutra level. It's not talking about accessing clear light mind or anything like that. Whereas here in these 4 yogas, particularly the last 2, are really a lot to do with cutting through to the very subtle mind. So it's sort of a little bit of a rough approximation, but we have that sometimes, those parallels that are drawn there. So this is what the text mentions here. And so that's the end of the text, the main part of the text. And so the very last section of the text is the dedication. And then here, then Panchen Losang Chegi Gyaltsen says, by the virtue of I, Losang Chegi Gyaltsen, a renunciator who has heard many teachings, having composed this text, may all migrators quickly gain victory over the 2 obscurations by means of this path, as there is no other second gateway to the state of peace. As we saw earlier with Nagarjuna, there's no second gateway. We have to come to realize emptiness. If we don't, we won't. The state of peace here is nirvana, and it can also mean enlightenment. So we won't be able to achieve nirvana or enlightenment without coming to this insight into emptiness. And then finally at the end, he says, it is the supreme essence churned from the oceans of sutras and tantras. It is the key point of all of the full intent of the scholars and adepts of India and Tibet. It is the path traversed without exception by the holy Mahasiddhas. May the sun of Mahamudra teachings dawn here today. So that completes the text. So where to start? So we've had a lot of instructions in this text. Sutra Mahamudra, Shamatha Vipassana, Tantra Mahamudra, preliminaries, all sorts of things. So where do we start? So if we go back, we saw that particularly in the Kagyu tradition, they really talk about these 3 levels of Mahamudra. In this text, we only really talked about Sutra and Tantra. We didn't really mention so much this pointing out non-meditation. But we can talk about 3 levels of Mahamudra: Sutra, which is Shamatha Vipassana; Tantra, generation completion stage; and essence, these pointing out instructions, non-meditation instructions. And we saw there, in quoting that book from Daniel P. Brown, Pointing Out the Great Way, a Mahamudra book, saying that basically, the pointing out instructions seem very attractive because we just sit there, the master says a few short, pithy instructions, and then boom, we realize nature of mind, and we're sort of on the way to enlightenment. So it sounds like that's for me, that's the easy way. I want to do that. But as Daniel P. Brown says, and also we saw in a quote from His Holiness in a Kagyu text, is that ordinary practitioners generally do not understand the pointing out instructions because their minds are too clouded by coarse level thoughts, mistaken ideas, negative emotions, and dualistic perception of the external world. Therefore, ordinary practitioners must refine their minds through standard practices before the essence view can be introduced. So, as the text said, we need to really approach this in stages, to go step by step if we really want to take advantage of these pointing out instructions. And so therefore, we need to go right back to the beginning and to have a doorway for entering in to Dharma and a central pillar for Mahayana, then refuge and bodhicitta. To have a basis for those, then common preliminaries, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. To reflect on precious human life, to aspire to make our life meaningful so that we don't waste our life, and then to reflect on death and impermanence, to understand this precious opportunity we've got now, not going to last forever, to avoid having regrets later in our life, having wasted our life. And then how to make that life meaningful. First, reflect on the causality of our actions, understanding harmful actions lead to suffering, beneficial actions lead to happiness, and therefore at a foundation level of making our life meaningful, adopt an ethical lifestyle. We saw that that's the basis of all Buddhist traditions as well. And then on that basis, who can help us to overcome our suffering? And then understanding that Buddha Dharma Sangha can help. Then we can really sincerely go for refuge to Buddha Dharma Sangha. But then the next step is that even if we're ethical, we're still suffering. And then we develop the view of genuine happiness, to understand that the source of suffering and happiness is not anywhere out there, it lies within our own mind, and that we can overcome that source of suffering by realizing emptiness, and therefore develop the wish to be free of suffering. This is renunciation. But then in addition to that, to realize, well, everyone else is in the same situation as ourselves, and then go on to develop the aspiration of bodhicitta, the wish for complete enlightenment, so we can help to liberate everyone else from suffering as well. So through common preliminaries, we can have a good, solid foundation for entering into the Mahayana path. And for generating that bodhicitta, then we saw briefly that the foundation for that is first cultivating these 4 immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. And then we didn't go into it in this text, it wasn't mentioned so much, but then how to cultivate bodhicitta, particularly helpful, this practice of exchanging self with others, exchanging selfish attitude for cherishing others. And within that, this very powerful practice of Tonglen. And so therefore, how we can put this all together is we saw that the preliminaries are really the foundation. Without those preliminaries, I think you'll find it difficult to engage in any of the main practices. And here in the Sutra Mahamudra, the 2 main practices, shamatha, vipassana. But the door of entry to the whole thing was bodhicitta. So this is compassion practice. But to really effectively engage in compassion practice, just like vipassana, then it would be very helpful to have as a basis shamatha, because otherwise it's going to be quite difficult to effectively fully develop loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta without a calm, clear, focused mind. So then we can approach our practice in this way, as we see in this diagram. establishing a basis in the preliminaries, turning the mind inwards, and then on that basis, engage in shamatha practice, developing single-pointed attention. And then on that basis, now we can effectively engage in the two main wings of practice, of wisdom and compassion, or vipassana and compassion practice. And so, therefore, the shamatha practice here in Mahamudra, the two variations were observing the mind, observing thoughts, or resting in awareness. But we saw that many people find those challenging as a beginner. So maybe even before we go into those, do a little bit of work with the breath to get a little bit more stable and clear mind. Then we can more effectively move into observing thoughts or resting in awareness. And in terms of vipassana practice, here in Mahamudra, nature of mind practice. But we saw also the classic approach to that is establishing view of emptiness, coming to realize emptiness of person, then moving on to other phenomena such as the mind as well. And compassion practice, foundation for immeasurables, and then using this exchanging self with others to help us to cultivate the aspiration of bodhicitta. But what we are not to understand from this is that we fully develop the preliminaries, we tick them off, and then we move to shamatha, do that, tick it off, and then go on to the next. We need an integrated approach, that each one of these four areas of practice supports and enhances the other three. And we saw that even in the preliminaries, that in the text it said, every Indian and Tibetan scholar and adept praise those paths highly, meaning these preliminary practices. Do not think they are merely preliminaries, but rather practice them by integrating them into your actual practice. So not only to integrate preliminaries into all of our practice, but also to have an integrated approach to practice. But what we can do initially is put a lot of emphasis on preliminaries to start to be able to start to turn the mind inwards, because without that, we're not going to be able to even begin really shamatha, vipassana, compassion, because our mind will be looking outwards, we'll be lazy, we'll be chasing after things out there. We won't get anywhere. So really emphasize a lot initially preliminaries, start to turn the mind inwards. Once that starts to happen, then we can really start to work on the shamatha practice. We won't be so lazy, we'll be able to more get into that shamatha practice. Once we start to get into shamatha practice, then we start to really add in some vipassana practice of emptiness, nature of mind. We start to add in really loving kindness, compassion, and Glen and so forth, and really have an integrated approach to our practice if we really want it to be effective. And so, therefore, before I go on to look again at how to then integrate really a little bit more specifically in daily life some of these elements, I'd like to do another meditation. And this is just a sort of more generic meditation just for ourselves individually to really start to begin to develop a vision for this life. What do we really want to do with this life? So this is really sort of targeting at the preliminary levels to turn the mind inwards and so forth. So let's do that meditation now before we go on to look at how to integrate specifically some of these things we've covered in this retreat into daily life. So find a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body and simply becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Now, no matter how much mental afflictions are in our mind, that is, no matter how much craving and attachment, anger and jealousy, fear and anxiety, and so on are in our mind, these mental afflictions are not part of the nature of our mind. They're merely like dirt covering the surface of our mind. And beneath these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. So imagine this inner purity of your mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light at the center of your chest, at the level of your heart. And we can begin to build a vision for this life by reflecting on 4 points. And the first point is, what are your deepest aspirations in this life? What is your heart's desire? What would you really like to achieve in this life? And try to picture your deepest aspirations very clearly. And then arouse the thought, may I realize my deepest aspirations. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling your entire body and mind. Imagining that your deepest aspirations are being actualized right here and now. Now, in order to help you fulfill your deepest aspirations, what kinds of material assistance would you like to receive from the world around you? And what kinds of friendship and guidance would you like to receive from the people around you? And then arouse the thought, may I receive everything that I need to help me realize my deepest aspirations. And then with each in-breath, imagine reality rising up in the form of white light, streaming in from all directions, providing you with everything you need. Now, the help that we receive from the world around us is not enough for us to realize the genuine happiness that we seek. For this, inner transformation is essential. So the third point to reflect on is, how would you like to transform and evolve as a person? What faults would you like to be free of? What qualities would you like to possess? And then arouse the aspiration, may I cultivate the true causes of my own fulfillment. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from your heart, filling your body and mind. Imagining that you're actually becoming that person with those qualities and free of those faults right here and now. And then finally, for the sake of your own fulfillment and to make your own life as meaningful as possible, what would you truly love to offer to the world using your own unique talents? And then with each out-breath, imagine the white light of loving kindness radiating out from your heart in all directions as you actualize this offering to the entire world right here and now. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in this inner purity of the mind. Your inner wisdom. Which is in the nature of loving kindness and compassion. Just rest there. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So let's have a look at how to set up a daily practice. So we're talking about training the mind. And we saw here that the importance of cultivating all 4 areas of practice. Preliminaries, shamatha, vipassana, and compassion. That if we leave out any one of those 4, then I think we're cutting ourselves short. It's going to be much harder to make any sort of progress because each one is a key part of the overall practice and each one will enhance and support the other 3. And continuity is the key to progression. So training the mind on a daily basis, meaning a daily meditation practice and integrating it into daily life. And also, in addition to that, very helpful to do an annual retreat, because in a retreat, particularly in the beginning, a group retreat as a beginner can give us a lot of inspiration and really a boost in the practice. A little bit difficult at the moment with the COVID, but hopefully that we'll be able to shortly go back to doing some group retreats. Very, very helpful. Once a year, very helpful. And then we need to apply effort to make progress. But effort means maintaining a joyful mind, not to think of practice as some sort of hardship to endure. In fact, effort is defined as a mind that delights in virtue. So if we're happy to do good things, we'll keep a joyful mind. So always really keeping a joyful mind. And how to help us to do that is motivation. That if we have motivation based on genuine happiness, particularly then in addition to that, the mind of bodhicitta, which is very expansive, then even if we're faced with difficulties in our life, we'll be able to maintain that joyful attitude. And you see those difficult situations as opportunities, not as problems or obstacles. And then we'll be able to work through them and develop as a person and respond with loving kindness and compassion rather than reacting with attachment, aversion, jealousy, and so forth. And really the importance of having, we saw in the prerequisites for shamatha, like-minded friends, the idea of spiritual sangha, that if we have this idea that I can do this all on my own, I think you're going to find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, because as a beginner, we tend to be easily influenced by people and things around us. And also we have a lot of bad habits. And so we need a bit of help to start to direct us in a better direction in our life through practice. And so we need help. We need to find these like-minded people and support each other. And so that we can really start to make some progress in the practice. And then some general advice from His Holiness in his commentary on this text, in his Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, on page 211. I've just extracted a few paragraphs from that, so I'd just like to read them out, what he's recommending about Mahamudra in general, what to practice. He says, just as we have exerted great effort and attention to listen to and to try to understand these Mahamudra teachings, likewise we need to make a similar effort to apply them in our meditation practice and daily lives without simply forgetting about them. If we wish to engage in a separate intensive practice of Mahamudra, that is, of course, very excellent. But even if that is not possible, it is very beneficial to add a certain amount of Mahamudra meditation to our daily practice, meaning if we can't go off and do some extensive Mahamudra retreat, at least we can integrate a little bit into daily practice. As for our daily lives, no matter what type of difficult situation may arise, we try to see it as not having any true and inherent existence from its own side. So here, this illusory like emptiness practice we saw earlier in the text. Although conventionally it is true that the situation may be difficult, but if it were intrinsically difficult from its own side, there would be nothing we could do to remove or avoid the difficulty. On the other hand, when we see that the situation exists as difficult in reliance on the conceptual mind that can label it difficult, then we can see that the situation has arisen dependently on many factors. This allows us in a dispassionate manner to try to change and eliminate the causes and circumstances upon which the conventionally difficult situation depends for establishing its existence. In this way, we eliminate the problem. But as beginners, we may find such an advanced method beyond our current level of training. But if our heart is dedicated with bodhicitta to helping others and achieving enlightenment in order to be able to accomplish that aim as fully as possible, we find that this helps us break through the self-imposed constrictions of our solid view of ourselves and of everything and everyone around us. Then, if on top of this, we try as best we can to apply some understanding of emptiness to the difficult situations we encounter, we experience a further weakening of our disturbing emotions and attitudes, and eventually their elimination and extinction. So again, emphasizing the importance and benefit of this illusory-like emptiness practice in daily life. So that's a little bit of advice from His Holiness, from his commentary on this text. So then how to set up our day. Very helpful to start the day with a good motivation. And here's a motivation from His Holiness Dalai Lama. Every day, think as you wake up, I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. Have that very expansive motivation, including others. Morning meditation, shamatha, as we saw, very important to calm and focus the mind. that can be a basis of not only Vipassana, but the compassion practice. And in terms of Vipassana, we saw here in the text went through both variations of Vipassana, of the classic emptiness of person approach or the more direct nature of the mind approach. So we can use either of those two methods we find more effective. If we're doing 2 sessions in the morning, then the first one shamatha, second one Vipassana. If we're only doing 1 session, then some sessions we can just do shamatha to calm and focus the mind. And in some sessions, just a little bit of shamatha and then do Vipassana. So these were the 2 main practices in the Sutra Mahamudra. But remember, have an integrated approach. So remember integrating preliminaries into the actual practice, and also compassion, because this is the door of entry and support for the whole practice. And then what other practices to do then in the practice, morning practice? We can be a little bit flexible here on what we emphasize in terms of preliminaries, compassion, and so forth, depending on what's going on in our life. So if we're finding that we're quite lazy, too busy for meditation and so forth, then very helpful to go into those preliminaries, particularly precious human life and death. That can be very helpful in overcoming that. If we find that we have a lot of sensory craving, chasing after a lot of sense pleasures, then that 4th preliminary, really cultivating view of genuine happiness, understanding happiness is not coming from out there within ourselves. If we're suffering low self-esteem, anger, hatred, then more in the compassion wing, loving kindness, compassion practice. With a lot of jealousy, maybe feeling a lot of despair, then focusing on the empathetic joy, the rejoicing part of compassion practice of the 4 immeasurables. And then during the day, what we've seen there as part of an effective short-term strategy, we need to continue to cultivate mindfulness. And so how to continue to cultivate mindfulness throughout the day using triggers. Whenever there's any tension arising, we can have apps that we can program to give us a reminder, or my smartwatch also can give me a reminder of doing a little mindfulness exercise, just to seed the day with mindfulness. And then to go into this witnessing mode, this open awareness. We saw that resting in that stillness and simply observing whatever's coming up in the mind, particularly any pleasant, unpleasant feelings, and any mental afflictions as they arise. But again, to be able to do that, we need that mindfulness. We see again that quote from Viktor Frankl here, that with mindfulness, we have then the ability, we have a space. We have in that space is the power to choose our response. Instead of reacting out of habit, we can respond with loving kindness and compassion. And then in addition to that, we saw here the importance in Vipassana practice to question appearances, this illusory-like emptiness practice, particularly when we're faced with pleasant and unpleasant experiences, to really look, where is the beauty there? Where is the ugliness there? Or where is the me here who's experiencing all of this? To practice this illusory-like emptiness practice, that will dissipate those mental afflictions and reactions, and that will feed back into the emptiness meditation. But also very important in daily life to focus on the positives, because we tend to have this obsessive focus on the negative in our modern world. And so here within the compassion practice, this empathetic joy is very helpful to rejoice in our own and others' positive actions and results, and to develop a sense of gratitude for all the things we receive in our life on a daily basis. And then at the end of the day, if we have time and energy for a second meditation, then what would be helpful then, or what would probably be more effective, is do shamatha in the morning, when we're most alert and focused and calm. And then in the evening, when we're maybe a bit more tired, maybe a little bit more the analytical style meditation, i.e. Vipassana, preliminaries, compassion practice is very then good for evening. Shamatha may be a little bit drowsy for that, but these are more active type meditations, so can be more effective than shamatha. And then even if we can't meditate we don't have time to meditate a second time in the evening, what we can do every day when we go to bed, again, is go into that shavasana posture. And then first thing to do is review the day. How did the day go? And pick one negative thing we did during the day, and then purify our mind of that negative behavior, that negative action, through these 4 opponent powers: regret, reliance, remedy, resolve. But equally important, maybe even more important, pick one positive thing we did during the day and rejoice in having done that, and resolve, make a strong determination to continue to do that the following day. In this way, we're purifying negativities, accumulating the merit. These two supports for practice. But also very helpful, think of one thing we received, have gratitude for having received that. And then transition to sleep, particularly if we've had a busy, hectic day, a lot of agitation and stress in the body, a lot of things churning over in the mind. In that Shavasana posture, on every out breath, simply relaxing and releasing any tension, releasing any thoughts that arise in the mind. Keep doing that as long as we can maintain some alertness. When we get drowsy, mentally note, meditation's finished, and physically move out of that position into whatever position we use for sleep. So this is a very good way to transition into sleep, the end of day review and the relaxing and releasing to transition into sleep. So that's a few brief points on how to really integrate some of these things into our daily life. So now we still have some time for question answer. So this is the last opportunity for questions in this retreat. So if you have questions, put them in the chat and I'll see if I can answer them effectively or not. Any questions, Tomer?
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Waiting on them.
Maybe I've talked too much already.
Actually, I have a question regarding the Mahayana path.
Sure.
It seems that the path should end with the result, but here the result, attaining enlightenment, brings us to another path, the path of no more learning.
Yeah.
So what is the significance of this path?
I don't know why. I mean, no more learning means basically we've completed the path. You know, there's nothing more to learn, to do, to achieve. We've achieved enlightenment. But the whole purpose of achieving enlightenment is to benefit others. So then from that enlightened state, then we can be most effective in helping others. And so that path of no more learning then would go on into the infinite future. So that would be the path or the trajectory we're on for the rest of this life and then for all future lives, that we would be in that enlightened state and helping others as much as we can. Maybe people have run out of questions.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Oh.
Yes, I was reading the next question from Dror. Can you elaborate more about meditations, about the preliminaries, maybe some reference for this practice?
Well, I mean, I think with Dharma friends, you have a lot of teachers within particularly the Geluk tradition. And so Lam Rim is taught very commonly. And so all of these preliminary practices come within the Lam Rim. So I would sort of recommend then to get a full explanation of each of these four preliminary practices. You can find them particularly in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim, his middling or extensive Lam Rim. And I think they're taught very commonly there. So then within that context, you can get a better understanding of each of those topics. And then also some meditation practices with regard to that. Also, if you're following in the more in the Kagyu Mahamudra or the Dzogchen system in Nyingma, then also these tend to be packaged as these four thoughts. And so then you'll find that within those various texts that they have, there'll be more extensive presentation of those, and then also how to go about reflecting and meditating on those. So that's what I recommend. Depending on which of the traditions you're following, you can certainly find a very good presentation, including some how to meditate on these points in those texts.
Thanks. We have a question from Greg, and it's a pretty extensive one. I'm gonna read it.
Okay.
So the question is, earlier when we were asked to imagine a situation for a job well done, I only felt a strong sense of self when receiving praise for saving the world, saving sentient beings, and so on. Is this perhaps an unhealthy form of perfectionism and overambition that can lead to burnout and frustration rather than some sort of wholesome and positive, i.e. how to work with saving all beings without expectations?
Yeah. Well, remember the context of that visualization was actually the context of identifying object of negation. So if you had a strong sense of self at that time in that meditation, excellent, because that is exactly the self that we are identifying with, that, as you rightly said, can lead to a lot of problems in our life and a lot of ego trip and mental afflictions and so forth. And so therefore, if we have that clear sense of self there, then we can search for that, see where it is. Where is it? Because it seems so strong and clear that it's really there somewhere. And then we look for it. And then we keep looking. And if we can't seem to find it, then that will release that grasping. And so this is exactly the practice that will help us to release that grasping to self. So that's actually good that we have a strong sense of self in that meditation, because then we have a clear picture, we have a clear target to look for in the emptiness practice, and then a better chance of doing the practice correctly. Outside of that, if we have the strong sense of self in daily life, then again, we can practice the illusory-like emptiness practice that we saw in the text just earlier here today, is again to see that even though there is this independent me that seems to be here, but based on my understanding and experience of emptiness, I don't exist in that way, that the me is just a mere name, merely it's like an illusion and so forth. And that can also help reduce the grasping to this strong, solid self. But what we need to remember is that we will not be able to initially release all grasping. I mean, that's going to take some time. Remember, that's the long-term strategy to release all grasping. So not to, get upset at ourselves if we have a strong sense of self, particularly if we're doing good things for others. That's where we start. So it's okay to have a strong sense of self when we are helping others, because that's still grasping, but it's not leading to mental afflictions. But if it's leading to mental afflictions, then we can apply that illusory-like emptiness investigation in daily life. But another thing that can be very helpful here is to shift the focus. I think His Holiness mentioned that a little bit in his recommendation there, is that if we shift the focus onto others, then that's me attitude, the grasping will also dissipate. If we can really cultivate this aspiration of bodhicitta, particularly, or at least loving kindness and compassion for others, but certainly bodhicitta, then that's going to be very helpful for reducing the negative aspects, at least, of this self-grasping mind. So that would be very helpful. And also within the bodhicitta, I briefly just mentioned this exchanging self with others approach to bodhicitta, and within that, the Tonglen practice. So that Tonglen practice is also a very powerful practice. It can also help to reduce at least the negative aspects of self-grasping, which is the me first attitude, what's called self-cherishing, sort of the ego trip sort of thing. So that Tonglen practice can also be very powerful and helpful for reducing that as well. So that's a few things that we can do with regard to that. So I think we've still got time for one or two more questions if there are.
Yeah, sure. Next question is from Dana. And it reads, in the last meditation, I thought about my vision for this life, and that vision includes helping others with my talent. I feel like
say again, helping others with
my talents, personal talents. Yeah. I feel like for this lifetime, it's more practical for me than to focus on all sentient beings. This is not practical. I can influence some of them that can be assisted by my talent. So I guess the question is, how do you comment on that?
Very good. Excellent. I mean, we talk about all sentient beings, you know, and it's very easy for that to roll off the tongue, you know. I'll achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. But then in a practical way, in daily life, what does all sentient beings really mean in a practical sense? It means everyone we come into contact with. And so that's really the sort of practical way in daily life of all sentient beings, meaning whoever we encounter, we try to help them, try not to harm them, try to benefit them as best we can. That's the practical way to do it. So very good what you were saying there in terms of that. But we can, and that's in terms of helping, but we can develop the aspiration of bodhicitta to all sentient beings. Because if we develop that aspiration, that means that when we actually then encounter people in our life, then they're included in all sentient beings, and then we'll be able to benefit them. So yes, that's a very good idea. What you suggested there is help as much as we can the people we come into contact in daily life. And if we can't help them, as His Holiness says, at least don't harm them. Okay, maybe one more question, and then we've run out of time. If there's one more question.
It seems that I missed the second part of Greg's question from before.
Okay.
I think it's a question. He says, in some traditions, it is said that awareness cannot be self-aware, like a tooth can't bite itself, or like the eyes can't see themselves. So can you please comment on this?
That's a very, that's very philosophical. So I think we don't have the time to talk about that here. Yeah, maybe we just leave that out, because it really gets into a lot of philosophy about self-knowers and so forth. So let's leave that question, because we've run out of time. So let's stop there. We've run out of time. And again, before we finish, let us dedicate not only what we have done here today, but the whole retreat. We can dedicate that on the basis of this Shantideva dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you very much. So I'd just like to finish by thanking Dharma Friends for hosting this event, and for all the people such as Tom and Sheer and others who help support these sessions. And lastly, I'd like just to thank all of you for making the time and effort to attend this retreat. And I really hope that you got something out of this retreat. And if you did, as His Holiness mentioned, don't just leave it as a nice memory, but use it and integrate it into your life to develop yourself, to improve yourself, and then try to help others around you as much as you can. So thank you very much. I hope to see you again sometime in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
Glen.
I also want to speak on behalf of us all, I think, when I thank our dear teacher Glen for this precious and extensive teaching, for making this profound materials accessible to us, and for answering all our questions with such patience and clarity. So thank you very much, Glen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Thank you. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye,